Welcome to the Media Roundtable Industry Edition. If you've been keeping up with us, we've spent the last few years talking to leading voices in podcasts about what they create, why they create it, and the impact they want to have on the world. It's a true roundtable format, and like we say in the name, this is our industry edition. So it's going to be a little bit less focus on the creators and more about how media and audio industry experts can adapt to the news of the day. I am your host, Kyle Jelinek, Senior Account Lead Director here at Oxford Road, and I'm joined by fellow agents of influence, including our CEO, Mr. Dan Granger.
Hi, it's good to see you, Kyle. You're doing great, by the way.
Well, thanks.
I want you to know that.
I want to get you out of a job here, at least. I mean, you wear many hats here at the agency. Maybe we'll just take this one off you. Take it off your
Let's see what you got. Let's do it.
And then with us, as always, is the incomparable Mr. Stuart Redwine, VP of Creative Services here at Oxford.
I asked if I was in trouble because you said Stuart Redwine. You used my full name. I thought maybe I was in trouble, and turns out I was.
You were, yes. Excellent. And then keeping us all in line here is Spencer Simonson, the media buyer extraordinaire here at Oxford Road. Welcome, Spencer.
I'm so happy to be here. I do apologize. I have not corrected either of you. My last name is pronounced Simonson.
Okay, that was a point.
I set a bad precedent. I set a very bad precedent. That's my fault.
I literally went back to the previous episode. I'm like,
I know.
Dan got it right.
I know Norwegian names.
Now we know. Excellent. We'll jump in here in a second, but I just wanted to kind of give a layout here of a couple of news items that are hitting our feeds. The industry is being shaken right now with the economy. Layoffs at Odyssey, 250 people were laid off last week. They're looking to cut more expenses. Media Post displayed in their ad tracker that July was the worst month for ad spending in the past 2 years. So whether you call it a recession or not, it is impacting this industry in a very heavy way. The mid-pandemic jump that we saw is normalizing, and people are kind of getting back to everything, and it's shaken. Also, TikTok announced that they're prepping for midterm misinformation, which to me is a little bit interesting because obviously we've got the midterms coming up, but this is a company who time and time again has been at the forefront of privacy concerns and people stealing our data. And now they're taking a stand against misinformation. I think it's pretty interesting. And then on a lighter note, Finland's prime minister, apparently she likes to party. Sanna Marin, she submitted for a drug test to prove like, hey, I was just having fun with my friends. What do you guys think about that? What do you think about?
Did you guys see the video?
Yes.
Oh, it's incredible.
Yes,
I mean, she's a human being. And I think for Finland, that was a big marketing win. I don't think this is going to be a problem for her or for the country. I think tourism's going to get better. I think that she has changed the conversation and paved over some of the questionable history of the decisions Finland has made in the last 100 years. I think she is changing the narrative in the conversation. So I think this is from a marketer's standpoint, big win. It's
huge. And what do we think? Do we want to see Biden dance? We want to see what?
Yes, I mean, yes, we do, but I think it'd be different. I think it would be different.
It would definitely hit differently. Spencer, what do you think? Finland prime minister dancing, yes or no? Good.
Always yes. Always good with the politics are dancing. The politics are feeling good. I'm good with that as well.
Awesome. Well, I'm the host here, so I can actually give my article first. Podsights put out their benchmark report for Q3, and the one thing Podsights is a partner of our a network partner with us. They do a great job. But what happens is when you get all this data together, what they start to do is put out things that might not necessarily be true. And, we're in the thick of this. And why the data might point to say, for example, one thing they said is like pre-rolls work better than mid-rolls. I don't know if I believe that. Like maybe the data says that. But what do you think, Spencer? I mean, you're in the cutting edge of this and booking media plans for major clients. What do you think about everything that Podsights is saying here?
I think that we have to take all of the data with a grain of salt, with the understanding that it could be a very specific subset of data, especially for an advertiser who's able to be on big reach shows, right? Because those can set their own conversion rates, those can figure out their own placements, their own minimums, and you have to buy them. So if you're only looking at the ones that spend quite a bit of money on these bigger shows, those are almost always pre-rolls. Those are almost always over 400,000 impressions. So if we're going to look at the industry at large, I would take out like the ones that no other DR advertisers can be on, smaller advertisers can't be on, the ones that you know aren't a performance play, before you really look at like which ones work better. I like looking at conversion rates. They said that dynamic is better than embedded, but I don't think that's true either. I think there's just more dynamic inventory available. I think that the industry is moving towards more dynamic than baked in. We at the agency, we're trying to save baked in as much as possible. We're trying to get mid-rolls for our clients. It doesn't mean that the industry is moving with us. You know, they're moving with the concerns of their hosts, their content, their business. So there's interesting things in here. I mean, I want to take it and like work with that data when I plan in the future. But I've seen like from a performance standpoint, time and time again, that this is just not what we're seeing in the marketplace and not what we're seeing from an agency standpoint.
Can I chime in on this as well? I think Spencer raises some great points, and you know, we have the benefit of sitting on top of hundreds of millions of dollars of performance data for advertisers, right? So I think anytime a report like this comes out, for us, we have the luxury of being able to cross-reference it against our own data and to know, you know, what holds up and what doesn't. And I think you guys have already flagged a couple of the things that look suspect based on our experience, and our data are, you know, of course, dynamic, outperforming, embedded. There's got to be something behind that. And to Spencer's point, they might have made that based on volume rather than actually efficiency of, you know, cost per lead or cost per acquisition. But then the other thing is like, and this is a bit of a broader topic, but I think it's really important. You know, we have diversified our involvement with pod sites. I think that they have been representing an important solution for the industry. I think that the move towards pixel-based attribution on ad performance is an important one. It's early days, but one of the things when you're looking for objectivity from a third party is that you have to look at the ownership structure. And because they're now owned by Spotify, Spotify is actually grading the performance of ads that they serve, which we know are very heavily dynamic. They're also grading their competitors. Is it possible that that could be skewed because the people that are owning and operating that have a dual agenda in what they're purporting to promote? That is possible. I'm not saying that they're being, you know, intentionally deceitful here, but at the same time, you know, I think when we take something that we might make planning decisions based on, we have to always consider the source. And if it's not primary data that we're sitting on, we have to really be careful when somebody else has a profit motive that might be associated with the types of recommendations that they're giving. And that's why it's very, very hard in attribution. That's why it's hard in brand safety. You don't want to be grading your own paper if you're the source of truth.
Yeah, 100%. In fact, our next article, I think, kind of springboards off of that. Stu, you brought in an article about Spotify, quote unquote, revolutionizing podcasts as a whole. And I think it's very much in line with what we're talking about here.
Yes, indeed. In their latest issue of the Adweek magazine, which I still get the physical copy, they talk about how Spotify is going to can they revolutionize podcast ads? And one of the big components of it is that they are partnering with Integral Ad Science to build a tool that will allow it to classify podcasts based on their content. So again, it's the brand safety thing. What's interesting with Spotify is you're buying the shows there, you can get your ads created there. And then just like we were talking about, what does it say when they're the ones that are ultimately grading the paper to say, you know, it's good or not? Is this a good thing? Is this something that is going to be able to last, where you get it all in one place, where I go, oh, let me just go to Spotify, I can place there, I can get my ad made there. They're going to tell me if it's brand safe there. Is that something that can last?
Well, and it is very closely tied to the previous subject. And I'm going to start out by saying what I wish everybody in these positions would say, which is we have a financial benefit associated with recommending that people use an alternative to Spotify's solution. So if you've been following this show, you know that we are focused on trying to elevate journalism and incentivize good content and good actors that are going to be more unifying than divisive, that are going to be mindful of the types of messages, the types of nutrients that we're feeding into people's minds. That's something that's very important to us. So we have partnered with and invested a great deal of resources into our relationship with Barometer, which is a brand safety tool. It is the first in market. And there are other solutions that are now coming into the market. The problem that I have with the competitors, not only do they compete with our financial interests, they're not coming out and disclosing up front, hey, we actually have skin in the game behind this tool. So, look, do you want the same person who's going to appraise the price of your house that you want to buy, the same person who is selling you that house? Or do you want to see some sort of disclosure if there's a potential conflict of interest? And so anytime that you're working with a third party, and I think that that's a critical question that we need to start asking of people that provide us with information. And it's just so sensitive around this idea of brand safety, because the whole point is having integrity in what you report, the reliability of what you're reporting. There's got to be some journalistic integrity here. We talked about a few weeks ago, we were talking about like, what should we have to disclose if we pay for an interview that goes on a podcast? And we all generally agreed, well, like, yeah, that should be disclosed. But this is the most sensitive thing that you can have, because it's a brand saying, we're going to trust you as our compass to know if we're aligning our values with the types of messaging that we're supporting. And yet there is that dual interest at play anytime a platform or a publisher, Spotify being both, has an incentive to do that. Is probably a good thing for the industry that there are more players coming to bear. Is probably good for people that can't afford their own access to a service to have something, even if it does happen to pass through the hands of somebody that's financially motivated, by what that content says. So I think it's good to see other people coming into the business, but what I'd like to see is more disclosure around this sort of thing.
Well, I mean, it was just a couple months ago, it came out in the news that Spotify inadvertently ran ads for Wild Turkey whiskey on a sobriety podcast. So I'm not sure we want to use them as far as what's brand safe for an individual client right now, just yet.
Well, I think to be fair, they are still our partners, and I think they are trying to make change. But I think, as you're pointing out here, it's hard to do this stuff well, even when you're doing your best to pull it off. And when you're dealing with 4 million programs on a platform and you're supposed to give guidance, things can get messy quickly, and your tech has to be superb, and your protocols have to be, well tested, or things can go sideways quick.
For sure. Speaking of going sideways, Stu, you've got another article here about the hidden persuaders 2.0.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So back in the 1950s, there was a book in 1957 by Vance Packard about the godlike powers of advertising in those days, that they were hidden persuaders, that essentially advertisers can brainwash us to do exactly what we want them to do. Much of that has been debunked, or we've taken a more full look at it, but sometimes that viewpoint persists. So how that's connected to ACAS conversational targeting, which is what the story is about. If you look at it, it kind of sounds like buzzword soup. It's about using advanced speech to text technology and AI to find in any number, in whatever podcast is out there, where there is content that is directly related to your whatever it is that you're selling. So it could be any kind of a show, but let's say that they dip into talking about meal preparation services. Well, then if you're a meal preparation service, your ad should be dynamically inserted right alongside that. so that it's somewhat invisible. And the overarching topic here is the ongoing trade-off between, do we want to broadcast or do we want to narrowcast? And a tool like this comes down hard on the side of saying, hey, we want to make the ad almost invisible. We want to narrowcast it to such an extent that they don't even know they're being advertised to, because it works so perfectly with the content that it's alongside, where there's an entirely different school of thought. And we operate in both of these, which is, no, you want to be talking to as many people as possible. It doesn't matter if it matches the content. Performance is performance. As many people as possible, as often as possible.
Some thoughts on this from a buying perspective. We generally put plans together and they're based on very solid rationale. We're looking at very broad metrics that it can include everything from like an understanding of the target demo, decoding the opportunity, all the way through internal performance, which we mentioned earlier that we have as an agency. So, I'm all for, going through the list, picking every single show, making sure it's perfect. And I think that's the way that we generally always are going to operate. But for a very specific client who is having a harder time finding shows, vetting them for host approval and endorsement, and filling their budgets to scale appropriately, this is a great tool, and not just a budgetary tool, but one for performance. There are so many advertisers who want a very specific niche audience based on what they know works, and we cannot find that based on all of the testing that we do. I would have seen this more and more, especially with programmatic, which is an emerging form of media that we're all super interested in exploring as an agency. But this is a whole other ballgame. This is looking at the actual content itself. And while target demo is always going to be the thing that we, latch onto, because it's literally finding that audience, speaking directly to them, there's something very magnetic about the idea of literally knowing the exact content that you're going into and placing it right next to it. Like it was almost like an epiphany that somebody had, like, oh my goodness, I listened to this and then I got this, and oh, this is changing my life. So it can be a great tool for performance and for budget. And I think it's something that we definitely would want to use for a select amount of clients or those with enough budget to test.
Yeah, so not the be all end all, but another tool that we can use as we build out client plans and how they scale this channel. Moving on, I feel like we're talking a lot about transparency today. And Spencer, you actually had another article about an advertisement from the company Huel that happened across the pond, and there's a bit of a shakeup there.
Yes, this comes from Pod News. A recent article recounted how the brand Huel saw one of their ads flagged by the UK government body ASA, which is the Advertising Standards Authority, because the host didn't disclose whether or not the read was sponsored. And as our agency ventures further into international media buying, these kinds of buying parameters will need to be considered from planning through buying and even into the onboarding process. I'm viewing this news from the point of view of as a buyer, as usual, who wants to properly vet media opportunities for our clients and continue championing host reads. And I think the truly, though, interesting aspect of this news relies on the messaging component. And I would be extremely interested to hear what our own Stu Redwine thinks in reference to the idea that the best ad is sometimes one that doesn't feel like an ad. What do you think, Stu?
Yeah, so they've got different standards. Turns out different countries have different rules than the United States of America. And I think it's interesting on this one. The host just very quickly said right before the ad, quick one. For many years, people have been asking for a coffee flavored Huel. And then when he was done, he said, back to the podcast. But even that wasn't enough, stringent enough to go, is this that this was an advertisement? So yes, you've got a governing body that says, hey, you've got to disclose that this is an ad. Sometimes I think that the position or the thought with messaging that perhaps that the human mind doesn't want to be sold to or doesn't want to be persuaded, or doesn't want an ad to feel like an ad. I wonder how much of that is within the few 100,000 of us that work in the advertising community, and that out there, what folks want is they want their problems solved. And there's so much intentionality and so much intimacy that comes alongside with podcasting or with audio with a host, that that they have to pay their bills, they're a human being. So when they say, hey, this is one of my sponsors, let me tell you about so and so, it's like, does that diminish your the potential that you're going to use that brand, or does it actually increase it because you feel connected to the fact that they have sponsors, they have advertisers, they've got to do this to keep the lights on and keep the show coming towards you? So I think making an ad not sound like an ad, I think that comes down more when in the work that we do, in not writing a bunch of ad speaky stuff that you put into the host's hands, so they're forced to read something that sounds horrible and sounds not like the way that human beings talk. But the issue of disclosing whether it's an ad or not, I don't think impacts the performance of the advertisement in this medium.
And I want to double down on that and just, call out that we always run into, nobody wants to feel like they're doing an ad in the same way that like sales is a dirty word. Advertising is organized sales. But in reality, if you do take the approach that Stu is talking about, where you look at it like, no, we're trying to solve a problem for somebody. It is true that if I tell you about my fancy new water heater, 99% of the people that are listening are going to go, ooh, I wish I didn't have to listen to this. But if you're the person that's got the broken water heater and you need that fixed today, and you can get a little more context on what a solution might look like, you don't mind the extra 30 seconds and you don't mind knowing that it's an ad. The problem is that we try to, listen, we all know advertising is, filled with failed artists, and everybody wants their art piece not to come across as commercial. But in reality, yeah, I think the problem is overblown. And so when somebody says to you, we don't need long form ads, we don't need to do 60 seconds of creative, we just want to like get in and get out because people don't want to hear that, that's probably not coming from a performance marketer who's accountable for the results, or from the consumers who actually signed up for the product. So it's the price that you pay to get free content or discounted content to actually have to listen to commercial messages. And I think to some extent we have to make peace with that.
I started rewatching the Larry Sanders Show again for like the 10th time, and I came across the Garden Weasel episode. If you remember that, Larry, who does fake night show, he has to do live reads, so he has to come out and do an ad for the Garden Weasel, and he's so uncomfortable, but guess what, it actually works. And it's time and time again, we've seen that. And it doesn't matter if it's an ad, if it's solving a need and people need this, the personal recommendation does a lot.
Well, it's interesting that the body that governs this in the United Kingdom is saying, we don't want the ad to be invisible. Don't make it a hidden persuader. It needs to be a known and stated persuader. I am here now to persuade you. I am an advertisement. And then you go into it. So, a lot of different points of view on it, but I think that ultimately it's with these hosts, man, it is the audience that they've built and the intimacy that they have there, where the listeners feel so close to them that the magic words are, I use this and you should too. And Dan, like you were saying, when you're the person that's in that need state and we haven't gummed it up with a bunch of ad speak, it all does, in a sense, work almost. It doesn't feel like an ad. It feels like your friend, just like we do with each other, telling you about this new great garage door or whatever it is that made their problem go away.
Or the Garden Weasel.
Or a Garden Weasel.
Yes, of course. CNN runs ads, and Dan, you had a bit of news from CNN that you wanted to share today.
Breaking. Brian Stelter is leaving CNN. He was just canceled on his Reliable Sources show, and he had a corresponding newsletter that went with that. And it's, I think for us, one, I've been a reader of that newsletter for a long time, because the purpose of his work is he's a media journalist. He's supposed to hold media accountable for doing its job. Now, he's been a great journalist for a long, long time. And I think he went out as they're doing, I mean, it's a true regime change what's happening at CNN, where they started as the main cable news channel, the first prototype, right? And it was straight down the middle. It was nothing but the facts. And as they started competing with other news channels, they started to do what so many, I think it's an interesting microcosm for what happened across the landscape. Since the proliferation of digital content, they kind of went the way of Fox News and became like an anti-Fox type of news organization. Now, they got rid of Jeff Zucker last year, I believe, he had really built the format and was a legendary guy. And a lot of people have called Stelter like a mini Zucker. But the point is, it's indicative of a trend where we are seeing formerly centered news organizations that move to one side of a political argument, now course correcting from that. At some point, somebody said, hey, you know what, CNN is going to stop being so overtly partisan. And so I think the takeaway for me is that it feels like a bit of a return to sanity, because I think Stelter, while he's very good at identifying compelling stories and highlighting a lot of, calling bullshit on a lot of the media industry, the problem was he was erring on one side of the equation, one side of the spectrum. And when your job is to be accountable, it is even more, hold people accountable. It is even more important that you're accountable yourself. That's why it matters with these measurement platforms for attribution and brand safety. That's why it matters for a news organization who's reporting on the behavior and the news credibility of other news organizations. They have to be objective in that. And so my interpretation of this is that under his watch, it was not following those protocols, and we're seeing a shift. Now, what's going to happen after the midterms? What's going to happen with the I'll just say it, the Trump factor, which is going to have a huge impact on media in the next 24 months, and then some. They may all go back and take the fruit again of taking divisive content and using it to drive up ratings and drive up revenue. But I'm happy to see that there is at least an attempt happening in between, in a relative moment of calm compared to where we were in the last few years, where people are saying, we kind of need our primary news to just be about the news and not about somebody's hot take opinion from a predefined perspective that may disagree with half of the country. That may not be the leading news organization that we want. So I'm happy to see progress in that direction. And I hope someday we get to have Stelter on the show. I'd love to talk to him about it. I'm sure he'll have a podcast coming out in the next month.
Yeah, stay tuned to the influencer. We'll keep but speaking about just reporting the facts, Spencer, you brought up an article about Apple and their new charts, which reportedly is giving us just the facts of what's going on in the podcast world.
Yes, via Podcast Business Journal itself, Apple Podcasts is introducing a pair of new top 100 podcast charts that track subscription podcasts and subscription podcast channels. So these include shows from all categories that offer exclusive content, early access to new episodes, bonus episodes, ad-free listening, and more premium experiences. And as of now, the top US subscribed shows include Smartlist, Something Was Wrong, and Fed Up, which are all attributed to Wondery, which is owned by Amazon. Podcast charts are the focus of much debate between agency folks and network contacts, useful for some aspects of planning rationale, but not a sure indicator of performance or even reach. So I would like to speak on my own uses for the Apple charts or other charts, as well as what insights I've gleaned from this new option. But first, I would love to hear from another panelist on their insights related to strategy or maybe market impacts.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, is like, you got to take the data that is available from wherever you can and kind of piece together some sort of truth there. I mean, sounds profitable. We talked about it in the influencer just a couple months ago, did a report of just comparing the top networks for using the three largest tracking platforms, and they were completely different. In fact, like, some of the top 10 weren't even on the next person's list of top 10, and then so on and so forth. all you can really do is take all the data that you possibly can and then try to piecemeal together what the truth actually is. And I think somewhere you'll find it. And the challenge with this is like, it's still an emerging medium. There's no, Nielsen that is tracking this, and there's one single source of truth. What you have is all these people trying to fill a gap and saying like, I got a way to figure this out, and they try their best to do it. And then somebody else says, I've got a different way to do it. And all of a sudden you have 5 different data sets, and we're, as media buyers and planners, we're trying to figure out, well, how do we make sense of all this?
Question on this particular one. Are they using the same, whatever you want to call it, algorithm to figure out where people rank on the charts as they are for the typical Apple charts? Or is this one straight down based on consumption?
I think because it's based on subscriber based content, it's based more on like the actual count.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because nobody trusts the charts. I mean, Apple has been the dominant player since the inception of podcasts. They kind of started all this. But when you go to look at their charts and their methodology for those charts, it's always been such a black box that like you kind of use it as a point of reference, but it's not really the most reliable point of reference. And so it's nice to see that they're doing that. Of course, it's only, unfortunately, the reliable list that they may now be putting out is only in reference to people that are specifically paying a subscription. And let's also remember, like, everybody was selling subscriptions until a couple weeks ago when Netflix started laying people off. And then they said, maybe people don't have an endless budget for subscription media content. So it's interesting they're doing something to build awareness for that product. I wonder if it's meeting their expectations. And it may turn out there isn't as much demand for subscription audio as had been previously hoped. Will be interesting to see.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting to see, especially because a lot of times certain charts will bundle together also like audio book content, or like Audible specifically has charts for their content, and they'll usually bundle in podcasts. So I feel like that's a better indicator of success, and it's not really anything to do with podcasting. It's interesting to look at from a planning perspective so that you can find things like lookalikes. You have a clear indication of like reach for things that you couldn't be on at one point and then became available, because sometimes things move networks. It also helps you understand the marketplace a little better when you converse with clients. Overall, like I use the charts occasionally just to find gems that we're not already on. Like that's really the main reason that I use it. And I also check the Spotify chart because it has a completely different metric. They let certain content onto their platform that Apple would never allow. And they have a video integration. So a lot of the options are simulcast or mostly video. And that's an interesting frontier that we're still delving. But yeah, overall, it's not going to change too much, except be used as an advertising tool for the services that put these products out.
Well, and there you have it again. Even in our industry, with all of the information, all of the data, the big data, the machine learning, the AI, we can't figure out a ranker that everybody can just go, yeah, that's where the most people listen. Like we're still struggling to pull that one together. And there's 22 different charts available. So maybe one day, who knows?
We will not stop until we get to the definitive source of truth. And
right.
That is our pledge to you, dear listener. With that, our never-ending pursuit of truth, we will close this week's broadcast. Dan, Stu, Spencer, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today. Dan, I think you're done doing this. I think I'm just going to take it over for now on.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, you got at least a B+, so that had to set a new record.
We'll have to see how it charts.
Well, which chart is it a B+? I heard it was an A. It was
that's
an A+
the Dan chart.
else.
Yeah. Was it Kyle chart? You were like A+, I think.
Number one, yeah. But yeah, this show is dedicated to our mission in mobilizing marketers to advance truth and civility in journalism. We want you not to just know the news, but use it for good. If you're a marketer looking to balance business objectives with your brand values, reach out to our agency, Oxford Road, by visiting oxfordroad.com and subscribing to our weekly newsletter, The Influencer. I happen to be very close with the influencer, big fan. Thank you, Bianca, me. Thank you, Kyle, Jennifer, Spencer, Stu, and the team at Podcast One. And as always, influence responsibly.